Hey everybody, Mark Furstein here, CEO of Recapped, and on today's Recapping with Recapped, we've got Robert from Fletch Product Marketing. Um, Robert, so glad to have you here. Really appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, 2023 has been a tough year for a lot of people. Would really love to dive in and learn about your lessons and things that worked and didn't, and really what we're excited about for 2024. Why don't you give a quick intro on who you are, what you're doing, and why it's so exciting?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. First off, this should be a bit of fun. So I'm a partner co-founder at Fletch PMM. We are a product marketing consultancy that works specifically with early stage B2B SaaS founders, usually horizontal, and we help them think through their positioning and messaging and ultimately end up writing their homepage as kind of a core asset as part of our productized service. And so in 2023, we were fortunate enough to work with over 100 SaaS companies, which
Wow.
not only helps us understand what's going on, what these founders are struggling with, but we use it really as a way to tune our model for how we think about positioning, messaging, and early stage go to market.
That's fantastic. And as one of those 100 customers, I can definitely speak to the value that we saw, right? And being able to refine the messaging and make things tighter, I think ultimately.
Yeah.
Who is your ICP? What was your go-to-market? How did you guys get customers this year?
Yeah, for us, LinkedIn is the channel. So ICP, and I kind of hit it in the intro, is founders usually seed, Series A, so early stage. Most of them have built a product, have some early traction, they've raised a little bit of money, and they're starting to structure their go-to-market programs. That's a perfect place. Normally, they're selling in a bunch of different ways. They built a bunch of stuff, and what they're finding is that they have different customers across different segments of their own, and they're just having a hell of a time sorting that out. And
Yeah.
so that really represents our segment. We work primarily in SaaS, and our vehicle, our channel is 100% LinkedIn. I mean, I say 100, probably like 98%. We get a bunch of referrals. And so our whole program is built really on the foundation of we have an audience of founders, we have an audience of marketers in early stage, and we share insights in public, share our frameworks. We treat what we're doing a lot like open source software, trying to help as much as we can. And eventually these founders and folks reach out to us with questions, and that's where we end up kind of selling them through private channels. We really don't promote our stuff from a marketing standpoint all that often.
Which makes sense because I think between you and Anthony, the frameworks that I see shared on LinkedIn, I mean, it's nonstop, just like the graphics that you guys are sharing. And so I see the virality of like every single post, it seems like. Can you expand? What were the findings that you had for this year in terms of like how LinkedIn worked? Were there types
Yeah.
of content that performed better? Like, what was your playbook going into this year on LinkedIn and driving growth through LinkedIn?
Yeah. If I really were to boil it down, I would say, fundamentally it was be specific and be prolific. And so we use LinkedIn, especially early this year, as a validation tool for ourselves and how we're thinking about things as we build new pieces. We just share them. And ultimately, Anthony and I love to debate out what we're doing and we argue as a way to learn. And then we get to this point of like, ship it. And so LinkedIn is kind of our version of ship fast, get it in front of the folks, see what they think. And in terms of the strategies, so like what works in LinkedIn, I think one of the big things we did where you see a lot of it now, but this wasn't happening a lot maybe a year ago, 18 months ago, was trying to visualize every insight we had and trying to visualize the frameworks to make them really easy to understand. And so for us, we built a really lightweight design system in LinkedIn for our posts. The purpose of that is really to stop the scroll. A lot of the stuff we do framework wise, that stuff's going to be valuable, but stop the scroll. And then as far as like what we put into the content, tons of iteration. And I think LinkedIn is ever changing.
Yeah.
And so even this year, it's probably changed at least two times fundamentally. I would say early in the year, I don't want to say it was virality was what LinkedIn was looking for, like really cool things, but it felt that way. We're like, could you create a splashy hook? Could you pair it with a visual that was interesting that gets shared a lot, and you get a bunch of distribution from that? About halfway through the year, I would say LinkedIn sort of pivoted the algorithm into learning. Can we get really specific stuff, how to stuff, experiences, examples in front of the right people? And so distribution for us actually went up because like our whole premise is give value. And so 80% of our content is probably just storytelling of experiences and bringing in real examples. And the algorithm really liked that for us. And so I'll pause there, but to summarize, it's like be as consistent as you can, constantly have a voice. And what we find is that we're interacting with our market every day on LinkedIn when we post. And so, as much as it's an audience building activity, it's a market insight activity for ourselves, and it creates fuel not only in the work we're doing, but also in like the content we'll eventually create because it's kind of this like cycle of creativity, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that, right? And I think especially for me, as I'm stopping the scroll, I think is a really great way to think about it. But as I'm going through and looking at it, it's like, hey, this is how Calendly did things. This is how Zoom is doing things. Here's how
Yeah.
Airtable, right? Being able to see those examples with like the underlines gets the juices flowing for me as a founder. I'm just like, okay, great. Now, actually, we're only talking about second and third level benefits versus, the capabilities of the functionality of
Yeah.
what their platform does, which is so critical. So I guess question for you then, if we go one step deeper, let's say the person watching this is early founder or just a team that maybe doesn't have a lot of resources. They're not able to post everything on LinkedIn. Obviously, it's a channel for you that's working. If there's maybe one thing that they can do, or if you, I guess, only had one play that they can do on LinkedIn, what would you recommend?
Yeah. Probably build in public. And it's effectively what we're doing. It's another way to like frame what we have. And so the whole idea of like, well, we can't really post everything on LinkedIn to some degree, we look at that as a cop out. Like you have to be willing to put in the work on the market side. And what I mean by this, so we work with a lot of SaaS founders like yourself. And the tricky thing that a lot of these founders get stuck into is they get really hell bent on building a great product. Hopefully they're spending a ton of time with their customers, and we see a mixed bag, to be frank. Some folks are very technical and they're like, I just want to get it perfect and then I'll worry about marketing. Our fundamental view is that that's a big mistake and it's a little bit backwards. And so if you can find ways to get in front of your market every day and then share stuff about what you learn, people will just be intrigued by what you're doing. And that's a lot, really a lot of how we built a big following really quickly is we just like we spend all day working with our customers that the content's right there in front of us. We do have to put the work in to pull it out. And so for those founders who are like, I'm not really a marketer, I can't do it, you'd be really surprised on how much people care about the fact that you're an early stage founder, especially when you're venture backed. You have access, like you're on the inside of a journey. And there's a lot of folks who work at other startups who are thinking about getting into startups that have very similar problems. You just have to start writing about them. And it's going to be shitty at first. And we experienced this when we got started. Our content was terrible. This was maybe 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now. And then you just have to start. You're going to be posting into the void for a bit, but eventually the algorithm will help you find the people who care. They're literally designed to do that. And
Yeah.
so long-winded say of saying just start. You don't have to do perfect posts. Like just share something interesting you learned and you wouldn't believe how many people are actually really close to where you're at.
I think you just explained the first 4 years of our journey, right? Like as a founder that was, so sales and product focused. I don't have a marketing background. I always kind of underestimated the impact of marketing. And to your point, I was like, no, let's worry about building the product, right? And it's like that saying, first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution. And it's
Yeah.
now that I've gone through and, 5 years into this journey, I could not agree more. And I wish from day one we would have started building in public. I wish we would have started educating more
Yeah.
because frankly, like we have competitors that have maybe half our features, but they have three times the marketing reach and they're in deals that we're never even a part of, even though we may be better or they may be better. It doesn't matter because they have that advertising engine. And so
Yeah.
that for me, that's a really, really big focus in 2024.
For a lot of SaaS founders, what we tell them, we try and reframe their thinking around marketing because you say marketing and they're like, oh, brand logos, I got to be salesy in public and it's really uncomfortable. And sure, part of it is that you got to be okay, like putting yourself out there. But when you reframe it as helping people in public and thinking of yourself more as a consultant for your target customer, everything changes. And so, even if you're not explicitly going to go build a service part of your business, you should think about your marketing, especially your social presence, in that way, because you don't even realize how much value you have. Like you're putting dozens of hours each week, hundreds of hours each month into your product. there's so much insight into that process. And if you could somehow figure out and treat it like a product, like pull it out and be like, man, if this was an information product, what would it
Yeah.
be? And just start super small. And that's probably the second thing that where everyone gets stuck. And we got stuck at this in the early stage. I have for years before I even started posting. I used to think I needed a fully baked thing. It's like, oh, I'll create the course, like the 10 module course, and then I'll share the guide. And like, that's bullshit. It's like,
Yeah.
share the one point, share the first point that you think you're going to make. Because what you'll realize is like, either people care or they don't. And so you can almost like micro MVP your way to that 10 bullet guide by posting 10 things. And that's the path. It's literally brick by brick.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna write that on my board because for me personally, I have a habit of just like over developing. I'm like, hey, we're gonna do this university, we're gonna do this, 5 series thing where it's like just ship the thing and just get it out there.
Totally.
And it's same thing with product, right? Ship the MVP, get feedback on it, iterate, don't build in a cave.
Yeah. And it's ego. Like,
Yeah.
candidly,
Yeah.
and I experience this. It's really hard to put yourself out there, to be judged, especially when you raise money. Like, there's pressure of like, wow, we have these resources now. Like, we have to look fine tuned.
Yeah.
And the reality is, no one's watching.
Yeah.
We were on with a founder today, and they're trying to get this launch right. And they're like, yeah, we only get one chance to do this right. And we're like, that's not true.
No one gives a shit.
You're gonna launch like 20 times. And there's one of Lenny's podcasts, they had one of the executives at Salesforce on talking about it. And even Salesforce, huge company, hundreds of billions of dollars, whatever,
Yeah.
they think about multiple launches because they recognize that distribution is a moving target. And you just gotta be consistent, put yourself out there, put your ego aside. And it's counterintuitive, but even the humility of making mistakes will make you more endearing to the people's problems who you're actually solving. And so you'll relate more by being rough around the edges, which is totally counterintuitive from a marketing perspective.
100%. It's funny because we're very lucky. I mean, like you guys, right? We get to work with some incredible brands that when you look underneath the surface and like from an external side, you're like, wow, they're growing at 500%. They just raised a huge round. And then you pop the hood and things are stuck together with duct tape and super glue and nobody knows what
For
the hell they're
sure.
doing, right? I think it's like, so it's just all the
Yep.
way down. No matter how big you get, like this still rough around the edges. No one's got it really figured out. And so just putting
Yeah.
yourself out there and owning that, I think is such a core part. Absolutely agree.
100%. 100%.
So thank you for sharing all the things that worked and congrats on the growth. Let's flip that. What didn't? What were the biggest flops? What were the most painful lessons that you guys had of this year? What were the lowest points?
Yeah. So I have two things that come to mind. So we actually formally spun out of an agency this year. And so I'm thinking of flopping in terms of what we were doing before we were doing what we were doing. And it's kind of the antithesis of right now. And it's when we were not being specific. We were trying to be too many things to too many people. And this showed up in not just our processes and our services, but in our content, broad, generic, low engagement. And that sucks. And because it's like, man, we have so much value to give, but nobody understands it. But that's more kind of, I would say those are closer to 2022, really what didn't work to like force us into actually doing things that might work. Specifically this year, of like the toughest learnings is recognizing that your product, and in our case, our productized service, is going to break and it's never perfect. And when it works, it's amazing. When it doesn't really work, it makes you really rethink some things. And those can be like painful moments. And
Yeah.
so for us, so this year worked with about 100 companies. And we've always tried to make our model bulletproof. And what we found is like there's just no such thing. There's always going to be outliers and exceptions and unique circumstances where it like really puts our model to the test. And what happens is you get to these points, and we work together, you've seen our models, but it's like every time we leave a session, Anthony and I do this recap of like, should it work that way? And so even this year, we've rebuilt the service. I mean, we've made probably hundreds of changes, but fundamentally have rebuilt the process we go through. So like change the product 3 to 5 times. And when you're going through, when you run into those walls of like, man, this isn't it, it's effectively like you're feeling the residue of like, this isn't actually creating value. And that is a huge like slap in the face. You start to question everything. And it's funny, it reminds me of the graphs of like as you go deeper into the problem that you're solving, there's like the graph that's like you start, it's like you know everything, everything's amazing. And then you enter into, I think they call it like the valley of despair.
Yep.
And it's because you're learning so much more. And so when we get into that points, really the way we solve it is via partnership. Like Anthony and I spend hours on the phone every day debating, coaching, teaching each other. If I didn't have a co-founder in this, oh, man, don't know how we would get through those like valleys of despair. And so big learning is like, and it's just entrepreneurship in general, high highs, low lows is self-awareness of like when you're in the lows, just it's a signal of learning and you have to just do the work and grind through it, even if it means tearing down stuff that's worked before.
Yeah. It's funny how even though we sell completely different products, completely different, so much of what you're saying echoes the like B2B SaaS founder, or for us at least, right? Actually, on my board here, I have this is the second act, right? This is where,
Yeah.
Rocky lost his battle and now he's doing training in the montage, right? Before the third act when you win, right? And so like all of that friction, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like it's the reward ultimately, right? Like the journey
Yeah.
is what we need to be focused on. I've been very lucky to have some friends who have had incredible successes, exits and businesses. And the number one thing that all of them have in common is that they say, when I was knee deep in the shit, I did not appreciate it for what it was because in hindsight, that was the most fun. That was where I learned the most. And that's what created the
Yeah.
person that I am today. And so, like, being in that, just realizing, like, listen, that we'll get through this and this is just another day.
Yeah. 100%.
Any best practices or tips or hacks that you learned this year?
There's a couple ways I think about this question. The hacks to me that come in when I look like holistically in like a year review come more back to the personal is you can't really fix your business stuff until you fix your personal shit. And to me, the personal shit is like health and balance and all of that
Yeah.
because of the amount of work it takes to start businesses and serve customers, especially when you're young, small companies. I don't have a hack to that. I think everyone's going to be a little bit different. To me, what I'm always trying to do is I have these different mechanisms and routines that when I become self-aware of like that I'm not really in it, that I can come back to. And so those hacks to me are the combination of really long walks around my neighborhood, showering midday. Some days I'll take multiple showers. It's like a hack of like
Oh, you
change the
feel
perspective.
a hot shower
And
fixes most problems, I feel
it,
like.
you can, it's just like it lets you reset. Gotten really into kind of journaling triggers. My wife has introduced me to this meditation app. I continuously fall off the wagon. I'm not consistent, but I find when I do it, it really helps. And so those are more of the personal side. Um, Business side hacks, like don't really have them. I think just fundamentally just back to our thesis of give value first. Like that's the hack to everything. Give more than you take. And it's like it truly does compound both in your brand and your audience. And obviously I'm a little biased because of the strategy we're taking, but I found that to be just incredibly valuable this year.
100% great. Say what you will about the Jordan Petersons of the world, but I think he's got this great quote where it's, you can't have a clean mind until you have a clean room. And I think it's so spot on. And I've
Yeah.
actually been incorporating that a lot this year. Like until my dishes are washed, until my bed is made, like it
Yeah.
sets up the level of success for everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Uh, what are you going to do differently in 2024? What are you most excited about? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah. The cool thing for us, we're not going to do too much differently. We're going to double down on what's working. That's really the plan for 2024. So for us, it's like continuing to share insights. And more specifically, we take this tack with our LinkedIn content. We don't repurpose. And I say don't. Of the 300 or 400 posts I did this year, I think maybe five of them I tried to repurpose a piece of content. And I think that lets us stand apart. And so next year is double down. Can we get another whole year of new insights that we're learning and sharing them in new ways? The two things that we're going to try and invest in more this year as well is really automate more of the business. And automation for us is a little bit different because we're not technically a software company. So a lot of it's more with like systems and making sure that each step of the process is really well documented, really well understood, potentially as we bring other people on to help support us. And what we hope that creates is a little bit extra time on our hands. And that's kind of the last thing we're going to go after this year. We're going to, and this is, it goes against one of our principles, like do less, but we're going to try and add a revenue stream via courses, or I should say a course. And so the program that we run to help founders rate their websites, we're going to try and do that as a DIY product offering early in the year. And we are looking at it as an experiment and something that'll evolve much like our first product. But beyond that, continue to teach in public, build the audience. It's the fuel for everything that we do. And then just carving out time for those two things is like the fundamentals we're going after.
Yeah, I love that because I think even just having gone through the process with you guys, so much of it could probably just be created with videos or a small little course of like, hey, here's this, here are best practices, here's examples, here's common pitfalls. And we probably could have gone through that. Obviously, having you guys there was incredibly helpful. But yeah, I think for a smaller fee, a lot of customers would take that up.
That's the assumption. We'll see
Yeah.
how it goes.
Well, if I can help. Last question for you. You talked so much about giving back. I think really that's like the spirit of everything that we try to do, right? Especially with the sales community. It's so small. And I feel like the
Yeah.
sales community on LinkedIn is even smaller. And so it feels like an echo chamber at times. But how can people help you and how can you help others?
Honestly, the best way to help us, like engage with our content, ask questions. It goes back to everything we talked about today. Is like it's not a one-way door. We live on LinkedIn for better or worse. And so when you send us a message, you get us. We haven't automated that part yet, which is getting a little tricky with volume. And so send us a DM, comment on our stuff, be critical, share your opinions. Like I'm not saying like be negative and aggressive, but we find that we learn more when people engage with us. And so it's all about facilitating those conversations. That's the only way to support us, as far as I'm concerned.
That's amazing. Thank you again for the time. I know we were supposed to take 5 minutes. I think we ran way over that, but
All
hopefully this
good.
is this is a value. Really appreciate it, Robert. Thanks again. If anyone's watching, definitely reach out. Fletch has been fantastic. I could personally attest. Was a game changer in how we kind of went to market and our messaging. And really appreciate you and Anthony and everything you guys have been doing on LinkedIn.
You're very welcome. And again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.